In this video, we are going to look at the situation where we do a fresh installation either based on Windows platform or based on SUSE Linux platform. First, let's take a look at the Windows-based deployment and look at the steps that are involved in deploying a Windows-based Agile controller solution. These are the basic steps. We need to install the operating system, we need to install the database, then we need to configure the parameters for the operating system as well as the database, then install the antivirus or OS hardening, platform hardening parameters, then we install the Agile controller, and then finally we initialize the Agile controller, and then other management tasks if we want to do them. So if you want to deploy the operating system, we deploy the operating system, we use the 64-bit Windows operating system, whether it's Windows 2008, it also can be done using Windows 2012, but Windows 2008 is what is mostly used. We do the deployment, or we do the installation of Windows 2008 R2 or SP2 service pack, and then on top of that we can do the Agile controller installation. But before that, we also need to do the SQL Server installation. So once we do the SQL Server installation, we need to make sure that we activate the license, or because initially it's only available for 180 days. So we need to make sure that before the 180 days expire, we activate the license before the trial period ends. Then we need to change the DB server username and password as well. Username is the SA, server administration user, and the password is default password is change me 123, and we need to change this the first time we log into the system. Once this is done, then we start off. Once the operating system has been installed and the SQL Server database has been installed, then the major task starts, that is installing the Agile controller itself, installing the controller software on the Windows system using the SQL Server database. For that, when we start installation, once we click the unzip the file and we click the setup file, this is what we'll see. First of all, we have to select the language. Once we select the language, let's say we select English, then we press OK. Once we do OK, then we move to the next screen where we have to go through all these steps, deployment or installation steps, before our Agile controller is installed. So first of all, we have to accept the license agreement, we have to agree to the license agreement, and then we press next. Then we select, once we press next, then we select the installation mode. That means, do we want to install Service Manager only, or we want to deploy Service Manager as well as Service Controller, or we only want to deploy the Service Controller in this deployment or during this installation. So here we have selected installing the Service Manager as well as the Service Controller. We are deploying both of them. So in the next environment, or in the next step, it is going to perform an environment check where it is going to check all the parameters or all the ports which are required for doing this installation. All these checks have to pass before this installation can start. Once this is done, then we do, or we configure the server related or server configuration related parameters. For example, the Service Manager IP address, the Service Controller IP address. If we want to define the size of the heap memory for portal heap memory or SM heap memory or the radius heap memory, it is recommended that we leave the heap memory sizes to the default. We can select the FTP port number or leave it to the default, and we can also enable port 80 access to the server. So it is recommended that we leave all these parameters to the default, and we can always change them later on as well. Once this is done, then we configure the parameters, the various other parameters for the server. For example, the time server, we can configure the IP address of the time server. We can also configure the AES setting or the key setting for encryption purposes if the communication needs to be encrypted. and then we can define an IP address range. This is the range. If we configure this range, this means that only users or only management stations from this IP address range can access this server. So this is kind of an access list where we are defining the range of addresses which can access this server for configuration purposes. After this, we need to configure the parameters for the database parameters, the SQL Server database parameters. Once again, the DB IP address, the DB port number, the different usernames and passwords which we can configure for the SQL Server database. Once this is done, then when we click next, we will see the summary of all the configurations that we have selected. If we are satisfied with the configuration that we have done, we can start the installation. Otherwise, we can go back and change the parameters which we do not agree with or which we are not happy with on this page. If we are happy, we do the start the installation, and once we start the installation, then we can track the installation process, and we can see that the installation is progressing. And once the installation is completed, or it's done, then we see the complete screen, and this means that the installation has been completed, and now our system is ready to be accessed and can be used for controlling our network access by the users and various devices. This is how we control, or this is how we do the installation for a Windows/SQL Server environment. Similarly, we can also have an environment where we have SUSE Linux platform. The operating system is SUSE Linux, and we are running Oracle database as the DB, and we want to deploy this system. The installation is pretty simple. First we do the operating system installation, then we do the Oracle database installation, and after that we perform the Agile controller installation. The Agile controller installation is fairly similar as we just saw in the Windows case. There's not much difference. We'll just skip the Linux and the database installation part. This is something for which you can get help from your Huawei documentation or from the documentation of Linux and Oracle side. The Agile controller installation is once again very similar to the Windows environment. You can see you select the language, then you accept the license agreement. Once you've accepted the license agreement, then you select which mode you want to install, whether you want to install the service manager only or the service controller only, or you want to install both of them. Here we are installing both of them. In case of Linux, we can either have a single node installation, which means we only have a single service manager, or we can also have a double node installation, which means that we have a high availability SM deployment. Service manager, there are two service managers deployed, which means it's a double node installation. This feature is only available with Linux. It's not available in Windows environment. So it's up to us, or we can choose how we do the installation here. So here we are selecting a single node installation. We're not selecting a dual node installation. And in dual node, we can also select this server either to be the active node or the standby node. Once this is done, then the necessary services status is going to be checked, whether the environment is ready for the installation or not. Unless we see a success for all the checks, we cannot move forward. After this, once this is done, then we do the server configuration. This is similar to what we did earlier for Windows environment. We configure the SM IP address, SC IP address, and the necessary port numbers. After this, we configure certain other parameters, for example, the time server, the AES configuration, and the IP address range, which is allowed to access these servers for configuration purposes. Then we do the configuration for database, or the DB configuration, which we have already installed. In case of DB as well, we can have higher availability database deployment using RAC, or real application clusters. This is an Oracle feature which is called real application clusters. We can use this for having high availability database deployment here. And then we do the other relevant IP address, port number, and password, etc. configurations for the Oracle database. It's exactly the same as we did for the SQL Server database in the previous deployment using Windows. Once this is done, we look at the summary. If we are satisfied with the summary, we can move forward with the installation. And once we start the installation, we can track the progress of the installation. And after the installation is done, we reach the installation complete screen. And once we press complete, this means that installation is complete, and now we are ready to use our Agile controller server for controlling our network devices or controlling our access, user access, device access into our network. So this is how the installation is done. In the next video, we are going to look at how we access or start our Agile controller for the first time after the installation, how we access and start our controller in our environment, and then how we uninstall. If we need to uninstall the controller, we can uninstall it, and how we implement or how we do the high availability or high reliability deployment. So we'll discuss all these topics in the next video.